So here we are again. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Branch Out podcast. I'm your host Vince. So
I'm
here we are
Emmanuel,
again. Hello, everyone.
and
And I'm
Welcome to
Arthur.
the Branch Out podcast.
this is episode number 4 of the Branch Out podcast. And today we are very excited to have with us a guest all the way from across the seas, Arthur from Toronto, Canada.
Nice to have you on, Arthur. Why don't
Nice to
you
meet you.
tell us about yourself?
Sure. So I am from Canada. I spent, I guess, the early part of my life working with NGOs internationally, and more recently, I've worked with a publication called Being Libertarian as an editor there, and very very interested in how things are developing in the world, what goes on. I've always had an interest in geopolitics. Done my studies in history and human nature and why people do what they do. So this is a fun way to get a chance to talk about it.
Cool.
Absolutely.
So how's life been in Toronto recently?
For me, it hasn't been too bad. Though there's been a lot of restrictions and a lot of crazy, unprecedented things over the last couple of years. My life, I do a lot of my work from my computer, so I'm one of those privileged people that gets to that I guess hasn't been affected as much. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been seeing big news coming from your neck of the woods recently, and we'll get into that a little later, talking about that again. For right now, we've got some drinks to get us started. I understood from your end you've tea.
Yeah, it's a little early in the day for me, so
Yeah. What time is it over there for you guys? It's like 6 hours difference.
it's about 1 p.m. Yeah, 1 p.m. Eastern time.
All right. So this Emmanuel, maybe you remember like 2 weeks ago, where we were trying alcohol-free beer, and we were trying like these different. I think it was like a pale ale. I'm not sure if it was a pale ale per se, but it was definitely kind of like a fruity variant.
Oh yeah, the lemony.
Yeah.
Thing.
And to what I understood, you hadn't tasted one of those before. So the other day, I was invited by some friends to go to this brewery in Burgdorf, and there they have some of their variants. So I picked up one of their pale ales, as well as this one, which I'm really excited to show you. This is their Rennrad one. For anyone who goes to Blackwell, you know what's coming up there. So I got a couple of those. Also, actually, I have 2 pale ales, so we can share. And then I have one whiskey sour. So this is beer that was brewed in a barrel that had whiskey.
Whiskey
brewed in it.
barrel.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well,
we've got enough to try here. We don't have to try them all right now,
no.
but I would definitely like to get your opinion on the Rennrad first.
Okay, go for it.
That one is the most special one.
Well, let's put those down here then. Well, you got the special.
Yeah, I need to get an actual opener because that was actually a lot easier than I thought it would be. So this brewery its signature beers are sort of sour beers. So I should do this next to your mic because yours will pick this up better. But
ASMR.
yeah. All right. Enjoy.
Cheers.
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 Wow, it smells sour. Oh my god. What is that? That's like vinegar.
It is sour, right? And these are not even this is not the most sour one that they have. But
What makes sour beer?
I don't know how they do it. Because
It's the first time I'm hearing about it.
yeah, it's genuinely like almost like vinegar.
That's
So
horrible.
it's very sour.
Yeah. Okay.
Say that closer to the microphone, Emmanuel.
What?
What is your opinion on this?
It tastes like vinegar. Tastes like carbonated vinegar. I mean, it's probably healthy.
Hey Jordan, how you doing, man? Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought it's like
Oh.
I think this would be good if you pair it with something, like something fatty. Because that would kind of like break
Or
up the
with
fattiness.
salad.
Did you pour beer into your salad?
I mean, it's basically vinegar. Just add a bit of olive oil and you got a vinaigrette, right? Oh, that's vulgar.
You're gonna have to finish it though,
I'm
because
gonna have to finish. Oh, it's like drinking vinegar.
one of my friends absolutely loves this, so she's gonna be like, what
Oh, all right. I shot it. There, done. All right. Well, we are today going to be talking besides talking about vinegary beers. Now I literally have a sour taste in my mouth for the rest of this convo. We're here to talk about democracy, one of my favorite topics to talk about. I'll preface this by saying that I've heard a lot about democracy from across the pond, from the North American continent, which how should I put it? Most of what I've heard from Americans and Canadians about democracy, actually from Canadians, I hear more positive about democracy than from Americans.
Really? Okay.
From the US, especially from sort of libertarian circles, I hear people talking about democracy in very simplistic terms. One of the easiest examples of that is when they say democracy is nothing else but mob rule. That's something that I hear very, very often. And Canadians tend to romanticize democracy a bit more. I hear a lot about, especially with this whole truckers thing, over the last few weeks, or a month now, I've been hearing Canadians more than I've been listening to them for my entire life, I guess. And they love the word democracy, and they use it very exuberantly and passionately. But I haven't heard a Canadian, or I haven't really heard any Canadians actually talk sort of a bit more detailed about democracy. It's usually just in the sense of, we're a democracy, therefore XYZ. Whereas the United States, the Americans, I hear them talking a lot about, we are a republic, not a democracy. Or republic first, democracy second kind of thing. And why would we want to be a democracy? And I recently mentioned, actually it was in the last podcast, I mentioned a couple days prior having been watching, what's his name? Timcast. I don't know if you're familiar with him, Arthur.
Tim Bull?
Correct. And him and his colleagues there, Ian and forget who else was there, they somehow stumbled upon the topic of democracy, and specifically they stumbled on the topic of direct democracy, and unfortunately they didn't have anything good to say about it. In fact, everything they said about direct democracy was really bad. I was thinking of pulling up the section. It was just a couple of minutes that they were talking about it, but essentially it was so they were sort of looking for examples, and then for some reason they pulled up Egypt as an example of direct democracy, which I thought was laughable. So yeah. And we demonstrated here live on the podcast. We just opened up Google, searched direct democracy, and what do you get? It's the Wikipedia page, and Switzerland is like the second entry after ancient Athens or ancient Greece. So it's like, hey guys, don't talk about direct democracy if you're going to go to Egypt, first of all, and So, as a Canadian, what do you think about democracy?
I'm not sure I'm the best representation for the Canadian mind or perspective on democracy, because there are people who have much deeper roots or maybe were raised for longer periods of time here. I spent about half my life here, and the other half in other countries. So, but I will do my best. And just really quickly to throw something else in here, as you were saying all of that, I was thinking was I would actually like to hear what Switzerland's perspective is on this, because I mean, even before any of this kind of craziness over the last couple of years happened, Switzerland's always been an example to most people when discussing democracy or any sort of democratic system of a really, really good model. So at some point, I'd love to get into that. As far as the Canadian perspective, I think one thing about North America in general, but Canada more than the United States, is I'm not sure how many people really understand what democracy is beyond their personal vote, right? And when people say our democracy or democracy is important or any of that sort of stuff, usually what they mean is I want to have a say in what's going on, and so my vote's important. If you asked most Canadians, I would kind of put money on this. If you ask most Canadians how our civic structure works or what exactly happens, I don't think many would be able to answer you with any sort of depth. And this is not a problem only for Canada. I'm sure many countries are facing this problem right now. There's kind of I don't know if it's an ignorance of the way things work and a siloing of everyone from laymen to experts into small little specialized areas, and outside of that area most people don't really know how anything else works.
Right.
Canadian democracy though is very similar to British democracy. It's modeled on it. It's the parliamentary system with a common law legal system. So almost anything that you'd have in the British democracy you'd have in the Canadian version of it.
Okay.
So how does that work? I'm not too familiar with the way it works in Canada.
Well, so to my understanding, and again, I'm not one of those people who's very, very well versed in this either, but to my understanding, basically what it is you have the country is broken up into federal ridings. This is on the federal level, right? So you have separation of powers from provincial, which is state or whatever term you'd want to use for that, but here's province, and federal. So the federal government has certain areas or that are their purview, and the provincial governments have separate ones. Federal ridings get to vote for their representative. That representative, whatever party they happen to be from, goes to parliament. Whichever party happens to win the most seats, their leader becomes the prime minister. Their party takes either a minority or majority government. Are you familiar with minority-majority governments?
Yeah, that's like, okay. I think in Australia they have the same kind of thing. Again, Commonwealth, so yeah.
Because, yeah, exactly. It would be based on the British system there as well, to some degree.
Okay.
Interesting. So basically, sorry?
Yeah,
what was the thing you just said? Federal rights? Or federal writings?
Purview.
What does that mean?
So, like, the federal government has certain things that are within their power to address.
Okay.
And other things are provincial.
Okay. On a state level.
To take care of. And the federal government is not supposed to get involved in that. I'm not even sure legally they can.
Okay.
But that would be a very detailed conversation that I'm not qualified to have.
Okay. So you vote essentially party, or can you also vote for independent candidates?
Yeah, so in Canada, I don't think there's any democracy where there's a limitation on parties. I think as long as you have a certain amount of signatures in almost any country that's a democracy of any sort, you can have a party. In Canada, you have the two major parties, and I have a feeling this is pretty much everywhere because politics tends to become polarized into opposing points of view. But you do have, I think, 5, 6, 7 maybe federal parties here in Canada.
Okay.
Let me actually just count them out really quickly. We have the Conservatives, the Liberals, which are they're supposed to be a center-left party. the New Democratic Party, which is like a far left
NDP.
party. The Green Party,
Okay.
which, as its name implies, is
Mhm.
environmentalist. And then you have the new one is the PPC, which is the People's Party of Canada.
Okay.
They are, I mean, Canadians would or Canadian media would designate them as far right. They're not.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
like center right. And then you have the Libertarian Party, and then there are some other smaller parties that are out there, but have a small number of people that are even aware they exist.
Okay.
Mhm.
What's the most conservative party then?
The more conservative would actually be the PPC,
Okay.
but it really depends because the Conservative Party itself, it just kind of sways back and forth between a very almost center left party to a center right party. It never really goes beyond center, but it has its moments. And the thing that makes it difficult to designate these things is that depending on the kind of Overton window or the realm of acceptable thought, which is constantly shifting, the parties, even if they don't move, kind of get moved to one side or the other.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
So you vote.
Personally,
You vote, right? Or
well, the funny thing is that I would have in 2015, and this is a bit embarrassing, but in 2015, I probably would have voted for Trudeau. I didn't vote in 2015 election, but I was interested because, as far as at that time, politics was just kind of politics. It was, there's little things that do you like this tax rate or do you like this little incentive, or it was small stuff. And the Conservatives had offered a very boring platform. They had been in power for a while. They didn't really have anything new to offer. Trudeau was offering an interesting future.
Mm-hmm.
He was talking about investing more into science, into research, developing new technologies, talking about legalizing marijuana, which for a lot of Canadians was a big
there you
deal.
go.
Yeah, that's pretty much why I got
Just
my
off of
vote.
that, just like, yeah, been waiting for this day.
It was marijuana and it was his hair. Those are the two the pivotal things that got him his victory. So I was interested because it was new, it was fresh, and I it was interesting. And I didn't know much about Trudeau as a person. I knew his dad. I didn't like his dad's politics at all, but I was like, well, let's see. We've had Conservatives for a while. And now looking back, of course, I would be very ashamed had I voted for him. It's still a little bit embarrassing to admit that I would have.
Okay.
But more recently, no, I would vote Conservative, probably even PPC, just because their values align more. And that goes into a whole other conversation of more national focus or global focus, which we should get into at some point as well.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have you have representation, right? So it's a representative democracy. You have also a constitution or
a charter.
Charter something? Bill of Rights?
Yeah.
Not Bill of Rights, right? What do you call it there? Charter.
No, we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Right.
It was made in the 80s, so it's very recent, or late 70s, 80s, around that time. And I guess I'll put it this way. Again, I'm not a legal scholar, so I might be wrong on this, but recent events have kind of made this seem like it may be correct. There is a clause in the charter that essentially says something along the lines of these rights are, immutable to some degree, as long or within the constraints of law and can be changed depending on the needs of the country or something like that, which makes it a very weak foundation. So that's why when I say that technically we do have one, we do, but I'm not sure how. I mean, to be really honest, the last 2 years have shown it's not very robust.
Okay, so what about, are there any referendums ever in Canada?
We've had one or two. They're very rare. I'm sure if I thought long and hard, I could think of the last one we had. I think we had one on a topic within the last couple of years, but it's never on, to my understanding, these pivotal, crucial policies. It's usually on something kind of like it. I don't want to taint it with my own perspective, but it very rarely, like, you would think that you'd have a referendum on something like walking down the country or a mandate to be able to work or any of that sort of stuff. But no, we haven't.
Right. Okay. I just pulled up here the Constitutional Act. Can you share my screen here? Of 1982. So this is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's kind of small. Here we go. And I guess this is what you were talking about, this first section here. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Okay.
So you can see a little bit where they might have been coming from on that. The British tradition, the Canadian tradition, has always been a little bit more of the conservative, the Burkean tradition, right? Where you have rights within the realm of responsibility. And I agree with that to the most part. And you have freedoms, but not necessarily in the American libertarian way of you have ultimate freedom as long as you're not imposing on someone else. It's kind of within a societal purview, let's say. So I can see where that's coming from on that. The downside with that kind of flexibility in such a foundational document, to my extremely not legal estimation, but just from what I can see, is that depending on who gets sent to Parliament and who is willing to debate the reasonable limits or the justified infringements and how justified they are, you can have a lot of leeway there.
Yep.
And one thing about Canada right now, and this is a very odd, see, I tend to be a little bit more conservative, but this is an odd place to be as a conservative, is that you have a very radical left-leaning government coalition in power. And so although they are the government and kind of the powers that be, they're bringing in such radical change that as a conservative, you're like, well, you want to conserve the things that have worked in the past, but for some reason they don't seem working to stop whatever this radical change is, which can be a very difficult position to navigate.
That's almost segueing into somewhere I want to go. Any other interesting nuggets you can pull out about democracy in Canada?
I'd say one thing that I take issue with, from what I can see, is party politics, probably everywhere, but in Canada is a bit of an issue, because what ends up happening is while you vote in your representative, once they're in, they're part of a party. A lot of people vote party regardless, so whoever the party dangles as the representative, that's who they vote for anyways.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, the danger there is that these parties are influenced by, first of all, they like any entity, they have their own aims in mind that are for their self-interest. Every entity does.
Absolutely, yeah.
But then secondly, these parties have their policies set from think tanks, not investors, but donors, people who have vested interest in that party's victory. And the minute your MP or the person you've elected goes to the party, they pretty much get whipped into a single unit to follow those policies. Now, they might still be able to represent your interest to some degree, but representing your interest is not their primary concern. Getting reelected and making sure the party doesn't replace them are the primary interests.
Okay.
And that's a cynical take on it. It might not be as bad as that, but from what I hear, and I do have friends inside the Conservative Party, this seems to be the case across Canadian politics.
So, in Canada, does the democratic process mainly present itself in that you can elect representatives for your region?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And do you feel like I'm not sure how many choices you get for representatives, or how the elections work, to elect representatives. Could you explain how that works?
So, to my understanding, anyone can run. You have to register with with Elections Canada, which is the electoral body that makes sure that there's certain rules that are followed. And it is a nonpartisan organization, to the best of my knowledge. It's supposed to be. And I have no reason to believe it isn't. The way it usually works is the parties will select candidates. They'll do all the background reviews and make sure that these are people they want in their party, and that will be who they present to the public for whatever riding on who they can vote for. Now, you might have independents. Very rarely do you. Usually, if you have an independent, it's because the party has tried to replace this person for whatever reason, and so that person who was an MP for a party is now running as an independent. To my knowledge, I can't think of a single independent that's won. I'm sure there have been cases farther back in the past, but recently, it usually means if you're kicked out of the party, good luck.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So it does end up being a pre-selected choice, and then you get to choose between 3 to 5 pre-selected options.
Yeah. So these the people running as candidates, they are already part of parties for the most part.
Yes.
If they're going to win,
they have to be part of the party being be selected to even apply to be selected. So yeah.
Okay. So it would seem that then the actual members that you end up voting as representatives are people that represent a certain set of ideals or a certain set of motives for the country.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah. So actually, do you think that the choices that Canadians have when it comes to their representatives are free enough or are diverse enough to actually have an accurate choice? Like for you, do you see representatives that accurately reflect what you think would be positive for the country?
That's a good question, because I'm starting to see it a little bit more, but not usually, is what I would say. And the reason I say that is because you have, again, if you go back to the concept of the Overton window, right, which is the realm of acceptable speech, or acceptable ideas is actually a better way of saying it. There are a lot of forces, very powerful forces, that move that. And parties do everything based on polling. So whatever, and people who, and that's a whole other conversation as far as how you gather that information and who is the people that are responding to surveys and polls. Yeah. But regardless, the way it works is a lot of these parties end up kind of becoming somewhat monolithic. Like the ideas that the spread between them is not very broad. Because of that range. And the more limited that range gets, which in the last 5 to 10 years, that range has been very limited and very left-leaning. Maybe not even left-leaning, maybe even just in a radical way, leaning in a kind of odd direction. Many parties have just moved very far into that direction, including conservative parties and right-wing parties and just everyone.
Interesting.
So I'll give you an example really quickly. In 2015, when Justin Trudeau was elected, there were liberal MPs, because the Liberals were a centrist-ish party, center-left, but centrist, who were opposed to abortion, who were opposed to gay marriage, who were opposed to, euthanasia, whatever it is. And I'm not bringing up these issues because these are things we need to talk about in any way, just to show the variety there. Today, 7 years later, you could barely find that in a conservative party. And if you do, the conservative party will probably kick them out. So again, the merit of those ideas isn't the point. Whether you like them or dislike them isn't the point. The point is, within 7 years, you went from left-leaning parties being able to hold these positions to even the right-leaning parties being scared to hold those same positions.
So if you are a Canadian and you do hold those ideals, which are, I guess, now a little bit old-fashioned by the political definition there, if you don't have many representation, you don't really have anyone to choose that really accurately represents you.
Correct.
Yeah. So that is a little bit of an issue, from what I can tell, when you don't have the ability to actually directly influence with your own voice what the policy is. If you have to always have someone that stands for you, you're never going to have enough diversity when it comes to the individuals that represent you to accurately actually project your opinions further.
Are you inferring that direct democracy comes in there?
I think it has a part to play. Would you like to take it from there,
I
Manuel?
smelled that. Okay. I'm interested to know what Arthur thinks personally. If you want to answer, what Arthur thinks personally. What is the core of the idea of democracy?
The idea of democracy,
To you.
to me, I'm very much of the opinion that the idea of democracy is, if you take it from a very personal perspective, I don't want to have the world around me shaped without at least having some input in it, if that makes sense. And I think that for anyone who's thought it through to, and I'm not saying this to in any way say other people haven't thought it through, but like if you're really thinking about it, when you look at democracy and just any democracy around the world, there are better ways. Like even the things that you mentioned there about representation, I could say right now at least 3 things that I think probably could fix that problem. So there are better ways potentially, but as far as we have it now, it's not that democracy is great, but it seems to be better than the alternatives that we've had in the past. That would be my perspective on it.
Okay. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to interrogate you a bit.
Please, go for it. Yeah, please.
So, from what I'm hearing, you want to have a say in what I would say is the Kratos in democracy. Demos, Kratos.
Okay.
The demos being you are part of the demos, and the Kratos being the rules. You want to have a say in the rules that you have to live under. Is that
correct?
Okay. Now,
yeah.
Do you think that you are the best person in existence to make to have a say in those rules? For essentially what I'm getting at, I guess the reason why you would want to have a say is because you think you know what is in your benefit, right? So if you think you know what is in your benefit, do you think there's anyone else in the world who could say, you know what, I know what's in Arthur's benefit better than he does?
Yeah, I think so. I definitely think so. Yeah. It depends, not in the big picture, like not in in its entirety, but in aspects, sure. Someone probably knows better than me how to arrange an economy. Someone probably knows better than me how to arrange a healthcare system, or how to run a business or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So there are definitely going to be people who know better than me in certain aspects.
But is the difference there actually about information? In other words, for example, take one of the examples you gave. What was it? Healthcare or one of those things. Is not the difference there that were you to have all the information available to you about any one of those things? In other words, if you and another person were sitting side by side and both of you had the exact same information in front of you, would you still say that the other person is better equipped to decide for you what is good for you?
Oh, with the exact same information? No,
Correct. Right.
probably not.
Okay.
I'd hope not.
Yeah.
So is the issue there then that you can't know as much as everyone about everything to make the best decision for your interests?
So I come from a different perspective, but I have caveats to my own thinking on this. So I'll try and give as well-rounded a picture as I possibly can. I think that when all is said and done, from a psychological perspective, from an individual perspective, you need to be able to be the person who makes the final choice, because people will always balk at something that is forced on them, even if it's a good thing. If I took your cigarettes and threw them away, you'd hate me, right? Even though cigarettes are bad for you. Or whatever, right? Like, it doesn't
I wouldn't
matter.
hate you. I'd just be like, get me another one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I come to this from a psychological perspective, because in therapy, court-ordered therapies seem to not have a very strong effect. There are a lot of psychologists have spoken out on that. And part of the reasoning is when people go to therapy, they need to want the change. And good therapists tend to get that person in a Socratic way to come to the conclusion of what needs to change on their own, as opposed to tell them and now go do it.
Right.
The difficulty at a broad scale is that no government could possibly deal with each individual and each individual problem. It's just too complex. The system is too complex. So that's kind of the concept of why we would elect people to handle some of these problems for us. Hopefully people who are smarter than us. And the big issue that I find is the people who end up in those positions very rarely are experts in those fields. The decisions that are made very rarely are actually the best decision. Or maybe I shouldn't say very rarely, but often are not the best decisions that could be made for the outcome. There are so many variables that are adding in, whether it's sponsors, whether it's elections, whether it's party input, whether it's personal ideas. And as an example of this, our Minister of Finance in Canada, that's in charge of the entire Canadian economy, is a journalist.
Okay.
Not an economist, nothing like that, a journalist. Our Prime Minister is a part-time drama teacher. Now, he was raised in a political family, so I'm sure he's not completely inept. But though I know a lot of Canadians who would disagree with my statement right there. But the idea is that, are these the best people? But even more than that, is what they're trying to do actually in the best interest of the country or the people? Or is this personal or party or group interest?
It seems like even if you it seems like even if you took an individual that genuinely had your best interests at heart and was really the best suited individual to make those decisions, since they only have really a fighting chance of getting elected if they're part of a party, that party has a tendency to perverse their ability to actually stand up for the citizens to the best of their ability.
Yeah, well, I mean, whether it's pervert or not, you're introducing a new influence at the very least. And I experienced this interestingly when I was working at Being Libertarian, where there are a lot of libertarian ideals that I agree with, but I wasn't a hardcore libertarian. And I found myself thinking and saying and kind of going along with things that my colleagues were saying or were interested in. And Jordan Peterson pointed this out really nicely, actually, where he was talking about how many of your thoughts are actually your own. I found myself with a lot of thoughts that were just the group's thoughts. They weren't mine. And when I actually thought about it, I was like, well, I don't know if I actually agree with that. So that's more what I'm talking about. It doesn't even have to be explicit. It doesn't even have to be forced, which it can be, especially in political parties where there's money on the line and elections on the line and power on the line. But even just implicit group influence is another influence. So yeah, the chance of them actually representing you is very, very low. You're the lowest on the order.
Yeah. I think that also has something to do with this idea of career politicians.
Yeah.
Which here in Switzerland, it's not such a big thing. It is, funnily enough, the more you shift to the left, the more it becomes more common. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but it's one of those phenomena that just seems to, I don't know. Do you have any idea why that might be the case?
I have thoughts on why that might be the case. Yes. But we don't have to go down that road. It's gonna that's
Okay.
gonna be a
Okay.
whole
Well,
conversation.
if we come back to the sort of the basic notion of democracy again, I would agree with you that I think the basic idea of democracy is, like I was saying, the demos, the people, having not just the ability, but I believe that human beings have the right to have a say, and I would argue a direct say in their fate. And if you don't think rules are part of one's fate, then I don't know what is part of one's fate.
Yeah.
But in the last year or so, I've been, well, even before that, but because of the whole Corona thing, I've been really confronted by this, my own kind of romanticizing of democracy, and especially direct democracy, as we have here. We had a referendum on the COVID-19 law here in Switzerland. And both times, the last time was in November last year, both times the majority, 60% to 40% roughly, voted in favor of the COVID-19 law.
Wow.
So I had to take stock of what I view democracy as, why this was happening in such a democratic place where I thought, okay, the idea is that people know what's best for themselves. I mean, if you don't believe in that, then we're off to, I mean, then democracy is the worst thing that we should have, right? So then I really was quite active in a lot of the resistance to the COVID stuff, the COVID measures. I documented dozens of protests and demonstrations in Switzerland, and it was very interesting to me just to see the broad spectrum of people who were there. It was maybe it had, I would say it had a slightly stronger conservative demographic.
Yeah.
But there was definitely a large portion of people from the center and the left. So it was right across the political spectrum. And then also people who were completely non-political, apolitical.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
And so what I came out with after after 2021, thinking about all this stuff every single day, reading the information online from the mainstream media, and doing like thousands upon thousands of comparisons with what I was seeing with so-called alternative media and mainstream media. Little by little, it started to hit me that, and I kind of knew of this before, this idea of being in sort of an informational competition, or if you want to say informational warfare. But it never really got me like it got me with this whole COVID situation, that it was so real.
Yeah.
And in fact, it became something that I realized, again, with this direct democracy thing, where, hey, the people are twice given a chance to do away with this COVID-19 law, and twice they decide, no, we're going to go along with it anyway. And I had to really start questioning, okay, so what's the missing piece here? What's going on? And that's where I believe information comes in. And so if if one starts from the perspective that this is how I go through it in my mind. I'm going to try and go through this as quickly as possible. A human being existing, in the plains of Africa, in the jungle of the Amazon, wherever this human being exists. This human being has to survive.
Yep.
In order for this human being to survive, the human being has to provide for itself shelter, it has to find security, and it has to provide for itself food and so on. And in order to perform the most basic functions of survival, this human being has to have information. And the information has to be as accurate a representation of reality as possible.
Mm-hmm.
The survival of this human being depends on the accuracy of the information.
100%.
Right?
Yep.
Now, bring this human being into contact with other human beings. This human being is now in what we would call a society. What changes? Well, the core function, this, I don't know what to call it, but this core element of the human being needing to have accurate information based on the reality around him or her, and with that information be able to make decisions that this human being believes are within their benefit. This does not change.
Yep.
What changes is that this human being now has an added complication. The complication is that there are other human beings involved in every single risk calculation, risk-benefit calculation. There is this additional layer of complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Because unlike the jaguar, the hyena, the zebra, the giraffe, or whatever, human beings have this thing of motive, right? Human beings have a thing of will. And this is what adds a layer of complexity. However, there's something else that's added, which is a positive. So you could see the layer of this as the complexity as maybe a con.
Mm-hmm.
But the pro is that the other human beings add potential.
Mm-hmm.
They add potential for more food, more protection, more shelter, etc. So, but the fundamental thing that the human being as an individual is doing is the same thing. More elements have been added to it, potential and maybe risk, where, for example, this human being maybe saw a piece of resource in front of him or her, and when there were no other human beings around, this human being would have thought to him or herself, I need this resource, I will take it. Why not? With other human beings involved, the human being will see this resource and think, well, I could take this resource, or I could take it and share it with others, and thereby gain their favor. I could barter it with others, and thereby gain something that I need from them, which I do not have, right? So there's potential and there's risk. Because if one does not, for example, share with others, where they see other human beings have need, maybe those other human beings will come and donk you on the head and take your shit, right? So this is the general idea.
Yeah.
So when it comes to democracy, the idea for me is democracy is essentially the ability for me to have a direct say in the reality that I exist in.
Yeah.
And when I choose something, again, it comes to the quality of the level of information. If the information that I am receiving is an accurate representation of reality, then the chances of me making a decision that are actually of a benefit to me increases. And vice versa. If the information I'm being given is not an accurate representation of reality, then that risk, or the chance of me choosing something that I think is in my benefit, but it really isn't, that increases as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, coming back to something that you finished with, Arthur, where you said something to the effect of, and I think it is something that I've had to deal with too, and that's that the ideal of democracy, or the idea of democracy, has been kind of shaken by the events in the last, well, month, in the case of the truckers convoy situation, and then also, well, over the last 2 years. I wonder if, and this also goes to the people who for years have been sort of bashing democracy in general. What I wonder is the problem not whether or not you have a parliamentarian democracy, or whether you have a constitutional democracy, or whether you have a direct democracy, is the problem actually, with all of these systems, a problem of information? That the information layer is actually where the problem is. And if you fix the information layer, in other words, if you are able to find a way for people to get accurate information about the reality around them, you could use direct democracy, representational democracy, or constitutional, or a mix of all the above. And maybe you wouldn't fix everything, of course, but maybe a lot of these things would be sorted.
I think you're spot on. Because for two reasons. One, definitely people are logical. So when someone says, "Oh, I can't believe people are so stupid. How could they possibly fall for all this?" and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When people are just dumb, they shouldn't have a vote. People can be ignorant, for sure. I mean, we're all ignorant of something, or probably many things. No matter how smart you are, the smartest man in the world or woman in the world will always be ignorant of certain things. But we are logical processing machines, and we do process on the information that we're given, or that we have available to us, or in the case of modern society, the preferred information that we take in. And the issue is exactly what you said. To my estimation, it's information, because the way things are right now, and maybe this has been a problem for longer and we're just realizing it now, which its own way, is that once you introduce marketing into the world, and you start playing with truth, and shaping it in ways that benefit you, or playing on the line of just making stuff up as much as you can get away with, at that point you have a big problem, especially when that's in major or influential sectors of society. And one thing that people aren't aware of right now, or not a lot of people are aware of, more people are becoming aware, is how much PR, marketing, and kind of corporatism or money influences the world around us. We kind of grow up thinking that we have this great civic system, and the librarian is there because she wants you to really know how things work in the world, so that's why she's there with all these books, and the professor just really wants to make sure that you're smart enough to move on in life, and your politician just wants his country to be the best place that's ever existed, and all these sorts of things. And these are nice thoughts, right? And the policeman's there to keep you safe from robbers. But the reality is very different. And as soon as you start to investigate the systems that underlie these institutions, you start to see how corrupted and easily corrupted they are. But one thing that you said I think is really interesting is we could look at it in two ways. We could look at it as like, forget it then. Democracy sucks. Bring back kings, or, whatever.
Yes.
Let's go somewhere else. Which I don't think is going to be a solution. I think that anyone who's got complaints about democracy would have more complaints under a king until they get killed. But the other way to look at it is to say, okay, this is a vehicle, and we want it to end up in this destination. This is the destination we thought it was going to. It's not suitable of getting us there. Okay, well then now we need to start focusing on how can we tinker with it, fix it, change it, and make it something that can get us to that destination. And maybe destination is a bad part of the analogy because I don't think there is a destination.
Mhm.
But
A direction.
like when cars didn't go fast enough or planes didn't fly high enough, we didn't go, okay, screw it, that's a terrible idea. We'll never do that again. You know, you tinker with it, and you fix it, and you improve it. And I think that's, if we can make that our focus, first we have to understand the world as it is and recognize, okay, these are problems, serious problems, and then we have to become aware and figure out ways to replace it or fix it. So in a super long-winded way, you're right, and information is very important, and we need to build on that.
Yeah, some of the things I have a problem with when people are bagging out democracy is a lot of things they're bagging out are not actually. It's kind of like the word democracy has just become this placeholder, and you kind of put everything in there that has to do with people having the ability to vote. Like, that's basically it. It's like, what's democracy? Oh, it's your ability to vote.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And my problem with that is that when I hear people talking about the problems of democracy, I'm hearing them talking a lot about like things that have to do with corporatism, or they have to do with monopolies, or they have to do with the way in which democracy is being, you could say, implemented in that particular place at that particular time. So, for example, the idea that, like, for me, democracy is, like, for example, the ability to vote on your party or representative every 4 years or whatever. I think that's in Australia. I don't know in Canada if it's every 4 years as well.
More or less, yeah.
More or less. To me, that's not democracy. I
agree.
To me, that's a joke, because those people, I mean, like you were saying before, they follow a party line, and then after they, and then after they get elected, they can actually change that party line in those 4 years and do something else. We've seen that. I mean, in Australia, it was so bad that the person who was the top of the party, who was to become the prime minister, so the party won the vote. The person got in to be prime minister, and then like a year later, the party sacked them and put someone else there. And that kind of thing is just like, that's right. And that's not what I would say lies at the feet of democracy, because that's not democracy. So that's what I have a problem with. But when I think about, like, honestly, in the first 3 months of the whole COVID thing, I was told by people who are close to me, this isn't going to go well. And I said, no, we're a direct democracy. We'll be all right. You know, there's no way the federal government here is going to get away with that. I mean, the people might need a little bit of time, but they'll come around and then they'll tell the government what's what, right? And it didn't happen. Instead, the opposite happened twice. So that's when I started to look at, okay, what is the underlying things in society that are affecting the decisions of people? And it's crystal clear to me. It's information. That's what it comes down to. So until I see it in the way of, until the information layer is debugged and anti-virused or whatever, anti-malwareist, anti-malwared. Until that happens, and until that layer is clean, and I don't mean it needs to shift, more conservative or more reality. There's so many times that I've picked up on stuff in the mainstream media, and I've gone and done my own 5-minute lookup at the data or whatever, and I'm just like, this is, and I came up with this term as well. Like, I started thinking of it as nonsense information. And then I came up with the term no sense information. Because it's in the way that if I, as a human being, am using this information in order to create a mental image of the reality that I live in, this information is no sense. It doesn't make any sense. It's no sense information.
One thing about that kind of information that I've been thinking of trying to put together a short book on figuring out how to see through these things, because it's difficult. It's difficult to spot at times. But one of the things that I think really is a tell is when a rational person can look at the proposal to a problem or supposed problem and can't see how that connects to actually addressing the problem. That's how you know there's something else going on here and there's some other ulterior motive, or this is a facade, or like you said, the no sense information. I think that's really good. Because go ahead.
You could definitely, this was a prime example in the last 2 years of no sense information being the most accessible information, actually. Like all of the legacy media was putting out these figures, and it seems like from your research especially, you really went into depth into all of these topics, and you could tell that there was a narrative being put forward. Or at least there was a lack of transparency in the data and actually in the information that people were getting. When people weren't getting actual information, they were getting basically the end result of the information,
like someone's conclusion.
Exactly. They were getting a conclusion and not the actual information. And I think this put into the spotlight just how much people really trust mainstream media, because it seems like 60% of the population in Switzerland was at least continuing with the narrative of the legacy media. Even if they weren't necessarily directly influenced by it, it may have just been sort of an overflow by their circles.
There's,
so if go on.
No, please, sorry, go ahead.
If you can't trust the mainstream media, then of course your alternatives are sort of independent media platforms and individuals doing their own independent research and just putting out the raw information, not a narrative, and hopefully unbiased information, so to let the individuals, which are generally rational people, like you said, Arthur, come up with their own conclusions. Yeah.
And if people are presented with information as close to reality as possible, more or less, you're going to come up with fairly similar solutions. So, we both came to the same conclusion about information at different times in different places without actually conversing with each other about it. We both come because as you look into the information around you, you start to realize, okay, well, you start to try to pinpoint where the problem is, like anyone diagnosing anything, right? And I think that's human nature. It's human nature to want to understand so we can improve, because again, it's part of our survival. But where we have a bit of an issue, and I would suggest looking into this, and it kind of sets me up for maybe some solutions that I have in mind, is that around just before and especially right after World War II, you had a big push toward propaganda. So you had a guy named Edward Bernays, who father of modern marketing, father of PR, nephew of Sigmund Freud. Like this guy knew what he was talking about. Brilliant man, who basically handled a lot of the anti-German propaganda from the Allied side. So he actually, if I'm not mistaken, he coined the term propaganda. I might be wrong on that one, but he definitely liked the term propaganda. And he didn't use it in the pejorative sense that we use it today. For him, this was information, how you spread it. And it existed before, but he was the first person to really systematize it. So following World War II, during World War II and following World War II, that became a really big, really well-studied, really utilized thing. He went from working for the government in the war to working for corporations in their advertising, and that's when advertising really took off. He's the one who popularized smoking for women, which before women wouldn't touch. It's disgusting. He's the one who he popularized so many things. It's not even funny. He popularized psychotherapy to be honest.
Okay.
There's a lot that would not have existed if he hadn't popularized them. The point I'm making here is that over the last 70 years, this has become institutionalized, this has become perfected, and this is now a staple of any government, any corporate, or any organizational communications. You have to know this, and this is what people need to understand is none of these communications are meant to express truth. These communications are meant to shape perception.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah.
And so the second problem that comes together with this first problem. So it's one thing if everyone's working on their own to shape your perception in their favor, you at least have competing interests. The other issue comes when, after World War II as well, in order to avoid having another world war, to spread peace and democracy and all these wonderful concepts, the United States particularly and the Allies, but the world eventually, set up all these global institutions, right? UN, IMF, World Banks, all these sorts of things, in order to keep stability and to hopefully just kind of set up a big peer pressure network to try to hold things in shape. And what we have now, what that's grown into, seems to be almost a global. You have these global organizations with a global vision, but their own self-interest in mind, still like everyone, that almost are acting, at least now in the last 2 years, as a government above the government, if that makes sense. They issue these mandates or these ideas. They are where our leaders that we elect go for meetings to have discussions about topics that they bring up. So there's this other layer beyond even what we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Interference and influence going on.
Don't they also make contracts? They even
they sign treaties and they, again, the peer pressure is still there, so they pressure each other into these things, and if you pull out of the treaty you get all these bad things, and we all decide to go against you, and it's a real thing. And when you realize that not only are you down, like, very low on the pecking order in your country, but your country has a pecking order in the global community,
right?
And you're way down. Like, your influence on what happens in your world is very small.
Yeah,
no matter.
And well, that's the thing. And what becomes, I kind of had this light bulb moment today, but what's happened in the last 2 years has shaped the world to almost a place where your government is more middle management that's taking the corporate headquarters messaging and pushing it down to you,
right,
than it is your representation for how your country's going to do. And I think that's where, and then where I was getting at with this too, is that a lot of the same network that is at the top of these global organizations just so happens to also be the same network that controls a lot of the outlets that utilize this PR. So you have a very centralized PR shaped perspective being shaped around the world, and it's hard to fathom how this could happen, and it sounds crazy, but it's there's a video, a little bit campy video, called I'll try and send over the link so you guys can link it if you'd like to.
Sure,
it's called Monopoly, and just basically takes all the corporations that we buy from, all our
hey, can you hear us?
news corporations, everything. Oops, hold on a second.
Sorry, we lost you there for a second.
No worries. Can you see me again?
Not yet. I'll let you know.
All right, give me a second. Give me 1 second.
Houston, have a problem.
Hey, did you want me to open this?
Sure.
That's the sour one, by the way.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh.
So what's your?
Those two are the same?
Yeah. These are the sour ones. That's the only other one.
Huh.
You also brought two, didn't you? Are those still on the?
Is this also sour?
I haven't tried that one yet.
All right, let's try that one.
All right.
Whiskey one.
Am I back?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. That was not intentional.
You were talking about global corporations. So.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that looks fun.
High global corporations watching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Google.
No, anyway, so my point is, it doesn't have to be a grand conspiracy or some crazy, like, it doesn't have to be anything like that. When
Mhm.
you have, like, there's a historian, sorry, apparently. Hold on.
I'm interested to try that.
There we go.
It's really dark.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just having an issue on this side with my camera.
Not as
See me now?
sour as the other one. Yes,
Mhm.
we can see you and hear
Okay.
you.
All right, so
Same.
Yeah. same thing again.
Is that your ringtone?
No, it's an advertisement that's popping up on this app that I'm using for my
Oh,
camera.
no.
So it's just being a problem. I need to reset my settings or something along those lines, and that's the issue, it seems.
No worries.
And I know it's gonna
Corporations
wait
are setting you
until
ads now.
I do this again.
It would be interesting to know or to discuss the possibility of, because if we have this
Okay, go ahead.
if we have this layer of pseudo or some kind of it's not, it is kind of governance in a way, but it's governance by almost like an ecclesiastical, or what's the word, like when you have technocracy, or it's not really a technocracy, but it's a club. It's like this
Yeah.
club, this global club, and you got all these members in it, and it just so happens that the leaders of pretty much all countries in the world are members of this club.
Yeah.
So they're all trying to kiss ass, or curry favor with their with these global organizations.
Yeah.
So when the World Health Organization says, "Look what China did. It worked for them. Y'all should be doing the same." If well, I don't. Tedros is not from Texas,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean. If and if you're a World Health Organization member state, or member, not even member, then
I'm sorry, guys.
then,
Please.
What was that?
What was that, indeed?
then
Yeah.
you're gonna want to go along with what everyone else is doing. And if you're a member of this organization, the organization is saying, "Well, this is what we think you should all be doing," then it goes without saying that if you're in a tennis club, and the tennis club, whatever leaders or whatever chair says, "We think you all should start using this technique for swinging on the left side or the right side or whatever," then people who are part of that tennis club are gonna sit up and pay attention and start doing it, and it's a ripple effect. And what you'll have is the outlier, for example, Sweden in this case, who didn't go along with the World Health Organization's sort of mantra or narrative. And for the first 3 to 6 months of 2020, they were mocked and scored by the mainstream media, by all the other governments. You'll get yours, kind of thing. And well, they didn't get theirs, and then the media chose to ignore them.
They were only covering them for as long as they seemed like idiots, or they could portray that story.
Yeah.
And as soon as they actually started succeeding, it was like, they're not interesting anymore.
They don't exist anymore. Sweden, huh?
Yeah.
What is Sweden?
You mean Switzerland, right?
Now they can't cover us either.
But it would be interesting to know if that layer can somehow be undermined. That's what I was gonna get to. Is
in order for democracy to work
Mhm.
as intended and as efficiently as possible,
Yeah.
you have to find a way to separate those two layers. The sort of driven by money and big corporations having a lot of influence in the decisions being made
Right.
at a political level, and actually how the individual say gets represented in policy.
Yeah.
Right, because this is one of the things we were talking about with just recently the Swiss, every 3 months here we have voting. We vote on referendums and initiatives.
Yeah.
And we just had one, when was it, 2 weeks ago?
Yep.
2 weeks ago. And one of the things that was voted on, there's a map of the state of Bern, or the province of Bern, and it shows every single commune. Like, I don't know, in Canada, what do you have at the lower level of, like, within provinces? Do you have counties, or?
Some places we would have probably municipalities or
Municipality,
okay.
Yep.
something like that.
So it showed it on a municipality level, how the votes occurred on a municipality level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what we saw with this particular vote was that...
Can you pull it up again?
I don't have it right now.
Yeah, because I thought it was really interesting. I watched the stream back again, and it really surprised me, because initially Emmanuel showed me that graphic, which essentially it was all the municipalities in the canton of Bern, and pretty much the entire, across the board, they had all voted against this. There was an extra tax on high emissions vehicles, or I guess standard emission vehicles as well. And most of them have voted against it, except for a small few. And yet the aggregate of all of the votes per capita was basically 50-50. There was a few percent, or I think it was about 5% difference between them. So despite the majority of municipalities actually voting against it, just a few very densely populated areas brought it very close to 50-50. The majority of the geographical locations still won the vote. But for instance, you found it? Great. Mm-hmm. For instance, like in the US, where they vote by region, like if you look at this, you would guess that it would have been pretty much like a 90%, 85% red vote, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But if you go by per capita, this was almost 50-50.
Yeah.
So this is what the actual result was.
Wow.
That really surprised me.
This is so interesting too, because this is a problem Canada faces in multiple ways, where let's just say, I think this would apply anywhere. Something that applies in a big city might not be applicable in a rural area, right? And why should people in that small area there be able to tell literally everyone else in the country, just because there are a lot of people there, don't get me wrong, but why should they be able to tell everyone else in the country what they can and can't do? I mean, look at these guys in the farthest corner from them. Yeah. Like, really? Should they be able to dictate what those guys get to do? And that's, I think, where it becomes a problem, is when a small number of people can dictate to a larger number, or even just other people that have nothing to do with them. And it comes to a solution that I think there are issues that need to be dealt with to make a solution like this work. But it would be very interesting for me to see what would happen if localities were able to have maybe a larger share of their own self-determination. For one, you'd be more involved with your local community. Your local community would be able to choose what they actually want, and you'd be able to hold your politicians more accountable, because they're right there. They're right there with you. They presumably live in the same area you do. So they're a little bit more connected to the local community, as opposed to, so in Canada, we have an issue where it's a big country, obviously, and on election nights, by the time, so many of the big cities are on the East Coast, and the Atlantic provinces and the French part of Canada have, for some reason, a lot of ridings and a lot of votes and MPs that they can put in. So what ends up happening is, by the time the votes are counted as you're going toward the west, by the time you get to about the middle of the province of Ontario, which is still quite far east, the election's determined. And it really doesn't matter what the rest of the country votes for, because you've already got your majority party or your winning party. And while on the one hand, you can argue, well, there's more people on that side, so obviously they should have a say. And I agree with that. They should have a say. But on the flip side, someone in Toronto, where I am, has no idea what works in rural countryside Alberta, or what someone
Exactly.
needs in the
Yeah.
Rocky Mountains, or what someone in French Canada wants, or vice versa, right? The French
Yeah,
Canada want here. So having that power more divested into local areas means, because in the end, what a government is supposed to be, to my knowledge, is a mechanism for solving bigger problems so that you can focus on what you need to do,
Mhm.
right? Just keep things working, make sure there's, roads and, things are clean and garbage is
Mhm.
disposed of properly so that we
Mhm.
can live our
Basic
lives and not worry about that
infrastructure.
individual.
Yep.
So that should be able to be handled at a local level. And then if there's need to collaborate at a higher level, that's fine too. But at
Mhm.
least you keep your person accountable.
Mm. This again offers even more difficulty if you have just a few representatives for a large area. Even if they had absolutely no other influences swaying them in any other direction, even if they were super well informed and they had all the ability to actually represent the people, it's virtually impossible for an individual to fully understand what people from these completely different in these completely different situations need,
Yeah.
and to represent them all equally. How?
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Well, for an example, there's an issue with guns in Canada, and the issue is that you have areas in the rural West where it takes the police 45 minutes to get to your house, or an hour,
Right.
if they're not busy.
Yep.
And that's obviously not a problem in a major city where police are 4 or 5 minutes away at any moment.
Mhm.
So a law that's created for a city doesn't have the applicability across the country. There are people who have different needs, and there needs to be room, some sort of flexibility for those needs
Yep.
as they arise. And one other thing I wanted to bring up is this move towards electric vehicles and sustainable development. That's a nice buzzword that they use. All that sort of stuff. That's another top-down
Yep.
agenda.
Absolutely.
And you can like it or not like it. That's kind of irrelevant. The point is, should these things be top-down agendas?
Mhm.
I don't know if you've seen the topics that we voted on a week ago, but what you're saying is so incredibly relevant. Like when we were looking
He
at
probably watched the last
Did
episode.
you watch the last episode that we put out?
I didn't. No.
That's amazing, because what you're saying is we were discussing this in depth in the last episode when we were going over the vote last week.
Well, that one, right?
Especially specifically with the with vehicles and moving towards as you put more sustainable solutions. So yeah, we were talking about not specifically from top down, but essentially from the other direction, what it looks like when it comes from the bottom up, like how that should be represented. And to bring up this graphic again,
Well, that's actually this map here is related to a provincial vote that we had, and the vote was to decide whether or not. So the topic was taxing
it's essentially
vehicles that are not green.
until now vehicles have been taxed based on weight, right?
Yeah.
Weight category. And they wanted to implement a second factor, which is how efficient they are, how many emissions that they put out.
Yeah.
Right.
So the larger the carbon footprint, the larger the tax on the vehicle.
Yeah.
Right.
And what you see here is such an incredible representation of the difference of what is of interest to people in the city versus people in the countryside. People in the countryside who actually need four-wheel drives to get around their farm, or, drag a trailer with cows on it or whatever the heck,
Yep.
And the people in the city, well, they're just hopping on a tram, bus, or train to get wherever they need, or they just get on their bicycle or walk, whatever, So this for me exemplified so well the idea that democracy also requires, like, if you're gonna have anything like what I would say is real democracy, which is direct democracy,
Hmm.
it depends on the decentralization as
Yeah.
well of the voting, like that actually takes place, because we were flipping it around on its head and talking about bicycle lanes, and we
Yeah.
thought, how ridiculous would it be to have a vote that is done by the whole province for bicycle lanes, where the people in the city, to them it would make sense to have bicycle lanes,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
to people in the countryside, like, it wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
No.
And so that wouldn't be fair either for the countryside to outvote the people in the city, because there's different interests, there's different realities at play.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Hmm.
And the funny thing about that too is that these aren't just neutral determinations that have no effect beyond the stated effect.
Mhm.
And I don't know how many people actually take into account, like, you have to have skin in the game, like you said.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if
Mhm.
I ride a bicycle to work every day because I live in an apartment and my work is two blocks down the road,
Mhm.
this really isn't an issue that I should be voting on because it doesn't affect me.
Mhm.
But also there are these additional issues that arise when you start to change and tamper with things. And this is the conservative concept, right? It's like, if something's been working, if there are these fences in place,
Yep.
before we move the fence, let's find out why it was put there. Because
Mhm.
what are we causing, or what are we affecting when we remove this, or when we place it? It's a two-way street. And with this kind of thing, what are the expenses to enforce this? What is the cost
Mhm.
that's going to hit every consumer when trucks are paying X and X number more taxes to bring
Yeah.
the food they need to eat? Like, these things have to be presented, and almost never are they actually presented in this way on any
Mhm.
sort of
No.
media. It's
No,
always, oh, the
it's
polar bear's somewhere. They're going to be better off. Don't drive our truck, guys.
yeah, yeah. I love this meme I saw. Well, I saw it
You
somewhere.
can't show it again.
Which one?
What, with the one with the?
No. It was something along the lines of it was like someone whispering it to someone's ear, like, "Hey, psst, guess what? If you just," and he kept like repeating it. It was a really funny way it was written, but essentially he was saying, if you just do this and this, and then the last thing was, give money to your government,
Yes.
they will change the climate. Like, and it was
Exactly. Well, and what's so crazy about the climate part of things, and this is something I want to dig into a lot more personally, and I have a whole other thing that I'll get into at some point with you guys on how I want to go after this. But there are so many conflicting reports on this climate stuff. So I think last year I read something on the barrier reef in Australia, and that all the doom and gloom of it dying off is not actually true, and actually it's growing.
it's growing back. Yep.
Right? We've heard about the ice caps in the North Pole, Greenland, and all those sorts of places, and you get these conflicting reports of they're going to be gone by 2022 or 2023, now 2025. But in reality, you also see these smaller reports of, like, no, they're growing. Oh no, the polar bear population has come back. Oh no, the whale population has come back. And the difficulty is that this is not a left-right issue. This is not actually a political issue. There are very few people in the world who go like, yeah, you know what? I hate polar bears and I want them all to die. Or, you know what? I hate
Yeah.
the Maldives. I want it to be underwater tomorrow. No one wants that. Everyone wants to preserve the planet. Everyone wants to have a good future and leave a nice planet for their kids. But the issue is when that good intention is taken and coupled with some really bad policies that might not even have an effect on what you're intending to. And then this is when you then become called a bad person for not liking this particular policy proposal.
Yeah, you just don't care, do you?
Yeah.
You just don't
It
care.
is really interesting,
Isn't it?
that if you don't go with like the official narrative of you have to do everything in your power, use paper straws, don't buy plastic anything, except for iPhones and computers and all that.
Yeah. That's fine.
Then you're a bad person, because apparently you don't care about the planet.
Yeah.
Like, anyone would identify as not caring about the planet.
Oh yeah.
And it's interesting too how people sort of dodge and weave between what values they have. For example, I was talking with someone not too long ago about e-vehicles, and I was saying, you know, because I had been in these discussions before, and I had said, okay, are you aware of where the materials are coming for your precious e-vehicles? And I kind of got into it a bit, and then the person comes back with this kind of, yeah, okay, but, you know, what are the alternatives? And, you know, like, basically they find a way to sort of explain that away.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay.
Yeah. Well, the sad thing too is that there are alternatives, and this is where, again, the impact of governance, and particularly government beyond our ability to affect, is really important, because let's say they do outlaw everything but electric vehicles. First of all, does that even have an effect? Are electric vehicles going to be worse for the environment in the long run? This is another thing that corporations and governments very rarely focus on, is any sort of long-term picture or secondary effects.
Or very good at.
They're not very good at it, no. You know, all these sorts of things. If we switch everything to windmills or solar panels, are we going to be cold on rainy days? Let's hear about that, right? And so, but do we have a say? And this is where the issue comes in: is you can force people. You could basically shape their behavior and force them into doing things a certain way at a societal level by just incrementally legislating them into it. It's like herding sheep to a perspective, right? And this is why I think it's extremely important that we do move in a direction of decentralization in a way that people have more say instead of less. If for no other reason, then, you know what? If you had two little municipalities beside each other and one was purely electric, have at it. Please go for it.
Absolutely.
And then we can see this is a great experiment.
Yep.
Let's see how it works. If it works well, great. Let's move on. We'll all choose it. But let's not just jump and take everyone, throw them off into the deep end and hope that they can swim.
That's the great thing about decentralization, and there being the ability for not only different people at an individual level, but also regions to be able to have the freedom to do things differently. Because just going back to, for example, the COVID thing, if Sweden had done the same thing that everyone had done, there would be no so-called case Sweden.
Yeah.
There would be no petri dish that had a different formula. All the petri dishes would have the same formula, and then you have nothing to bloody compare against.
Yeah.
Right?
And now we're not talking science anymore. Now we're talking superstition of some sort, or whatever we can think up.
Right. Yeah. Right. So that's what boggled my mind so much through the last year and even year and a half was the amount of logical decay, just the complete erosion and destruction of anything remotely logical consistency. It was so fallacious again and again every single day, how people would, you know, you'd bring up Sweden and they'd find some way to argue against it. Actually, most of the time they would just ignore it.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you going to do?
Smart.
You know, smart. Yeah. So, well, democracy. I think there's a lot we can still benefit from with it. I think it in its most basic concept, to me, it is the right concept. To me, the idea of every human being having a right to have a direct impact on their reality, on the rules that they have to abide by. I don't see anything that is better than that.
Yeah.
I think that is something that is, well, I don't want to live in a world where I do not have a say in the reality around me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, same. And you know what? People knew this way back in the day.
Thousands of years ago.
It's not rocket science.
That's true. Thousands of years ago. Like, they knew this. They knew that a well-informed populace is a free populace. If you need democracy, you need people who to have access to information. Everyone who is a stakeholder who's making a choice needs to have access to the information that they're making a choice on.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that cliche almost that it is now that says information is power.
Yeah.
It's not, well, maybe are cliches always true?
Probably.
I think they're based in truth, maybe.
Well,
They have
it's damn
origins in
true.
truth.
Information is power. And I even thought about like medieval times when you had a large amount of the population. This is one other thing that occurred to me is in this day and age, we have more information available easier than ever, right? We have an unprecedented amount of information available to us.
Yeah.
Right? And it's so easily available to us. So it's not a problem of the quantity of the information.
Mm-hmm.
There's something else going on here. And I thought about in medieval times when you had a large amount of the population who could not read or write. So what you had was a clergyman or someone that came through the village or the town who knew how to read off of scroll. Right? And they would unroll this scroll and they say, "Hear ye, hear ye." Okay? And basically everyone in the village would be standing there listening to this person read from this document, which I kind of put alongside what we are doing today with studies and with what's the logical fallacy where you call to authority. Yeah, appeal to authority, correct. So this person would read off the scroll and everyone would be standing around going, I guess that's what the scroll says, because, I mean, how are we going to know? If the person turns the scroll around and shows it to us, we're not going to know what it says, right?
Yeah.
So all these people would just be listening to this, and since it came, well, someone had to write that scroll, and I guess the person who wrote that scroll knows a lot more about this stuff than we do. I mean, we don't even know how to read the damn thing, right?
Yeah.
So this I found kind of interesting to think that here we are now in the 21st century. We can all read and write, practically, more or less. But still, we are essentially suffering from the same sort of detachment or the gap between us and the information that existed back then, hundreds of years ago. And that speaks to me about the information not being, again, an accurate representation of our reality. So we basically just have to kind of take it at face value and say, well, I guess, like a lot of this COVID stuff, there was a lot of panic and so on spread by the media. But then I actually asked someone this, I asked a couple people this on a couple different occasions. I said, if you were to have ignored everything that the media has been saying, and you just thought quickly about the actual reality that you lived in on a day-to-day basis, how much evidence can you come up with that there was this incredible apocalyptical situation? Besides the measures, right? Because the measures don't count. And so this to me was, and then you get these weird looks in their eyes like, and that to me is this kind of funny thing of don't believe your lying eyes, like don't believe your five senses, read what we said in the media and believe that, but for God's sake, don't believe your senses, your five senses.
Yeah. It's funny though that you bring up that era when knowledge and truth were dictated by a small group, a small network, let's say. Because it's not that they were bad. Like a lot of people look at that time, they go, "Oh God, the Catholic Church, they were so horrible, these horrible people." No, they were the purveyors of science. They were the ones who brought what was lost in the classical age forward and kind of tried to discover it again. A lot of philosophy, mathematics, science. Most of our universities come from the Catholic Church. Most of our big universities. So it's not like they were anti-science, but there was this issue. So there's a historian named Neil Ferguson, not the British guy at Imperial College who made all those bad predictions. But,
Gonna say.
and who unfortunately shares the same name. And he wrote a brilliant book called The Square and the Tower about networks and hierarchies. And what he brought up was that there are these moments in time, and obviously the printing press is a big one. The internet is another big one,
Yeah.
where information becomes accessible to the average person, and people become smarter and people become more capable of making these decisions. And I might be adding to this a little bit, but anyway, this is the concept that he came up with. And that becomes a threat to power, because when people don't have that ability or knowledge, if you don't know any better, you'll go with the person who knows better than you. That's just kind of the default to expertise. So when these times come, it does become a threat to entrenched power. And the idea of what you talked about with us today being able to read these things, well, you know, the funny thing is more people than ever have gone through university. So more than ever, we should be able to read these papers, these studies, and critique them. But I think that we are on the right path, in that the more of us who do learn critical thinking, the more of us that do learn to read these things and critique and understand how science works, and the weaknesses, or where, you know, this study might not be all encompassing, and this is not, you know, necessarily what it's being presented as. I think that's a direction we want to go, and we should keep pushing in that direction. And I think that the reason that there's so much conflict right now, whether it's in, you know, the over talked about Brexit world, or the Trump world, or the COVID conflicts, the culture wars, all this sort of stuff, is that we are having entrenched power freaking out because they're realizing that the more educated people get, the more they're going to want to have a say, and that is going to take away part of their what they've been used to, let's say. And this is why in Canada they're pushing, I think across the world they're pushing very similar legislation, because again, I think this is all coming from a top-down source, but they're pushing censorship legislation to censor what is allowed to be said, to censor alternative media. After Donald Trump was elected, the very next year, all of those big meetings were all about how to handle the internet, how to handle YouTube, how to handle Donald Trump, how to handle all these things. So there's obviously special interests that want to have or want to retain power. But I have a feeling that the more we can push into this decentralized world, the more we can push into desiring, like you said, reality above our personal ideologies. Like, let's just pursue the truth, and just where those chips fall, we'll follow that trail or that path. There's almost this divide coming up where we whether we get to choose or not, I don't know, but it almost seems like we have the option to move in a direction that is truly enlightened, like a second enlightenment almost. Or when you consider robotics and AI and all these tools that are coming into play that could be used for horrible things by, you know, powerful entities, we could be moving into an extreme dystopia where you have this really corrupt kind of global governance and that top-down system. And I really think that this is a pivotal moment in history, and let's hope we're moving in that decentralized position. And I think the more we talk about it, the more people are aware that it exists, the better. Like the more chance we have of moving that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I was wondering if we want to pivot ourselves a little towards the truckers, because there was something about the truckers that you know, I was watching the police crackdown over the last couple days, and I was watching like 3 live feeds at the same time for several hours, and I mean, I watched live as the what are they called? The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, as they charged the crowd twice, and it looked like they were gonna do it the third time, except that the demonstrators then seemed ready for it on the third go. I saw the horses come straight up into the people. It was an interesting tactic. I didn't know
Mhm.
that this is actually a tactic that they used. I didn't know that that's what they do with the horses, where
Yeah.
they use the horses kind of like a bulldozer,
Yeah.
but they don't come straight into the crowd. They come along
So
the front
cut
line.
the front
Yeah.
of the crowd. Yeah.
And so what happens is so there's a line of protesters and there's a line of police.
Yep.
And they're at a complete standstill. And then what happens? The signal comes, and the end of the two lines, the police line opens up like that, and the Mounties, the cavalry, literally, the cavalry come through this opening. They step aside, and within a second, the horses are coming through,
Mm-hmm.
two at a time, like 2 by 2.
Mm-hmm.
And as the horses come through, the police line opens.
Mm-hmm.
And as the last one, I think it was 4 horses long, 4 or 5, something like that. As the last horse is moving past, the police line closes in behind.
Mm.
And what happens is, of course, the horses move the people back about 1 to 2 meters.
Right.
Yeah.
So then the police move in 1 to 2 meters further. And
Okay.
so the horses basically brush up, literally brush up against the front line and move.
That's the point, to actually get them to move out of that space
Yeah.
to get back.
But it's an incredibly brutal thing to do.
Yeah, if you don't move back, I mean, I've seen.
Those aren't ponies.
No.
They're
The woman got trampled.
they're like war
Yeah,
horses. They're huge.
some people did get.
Yeah.
Get trampled.
That's
yeah.
what I wanted to say. I saw that as it was happening on the live feed, and
Yeah.
I was like, "What?"
Luckily, no one was killed, as far as I know. But
No.
the fact that tactic is being used, and at the end of the day, for a couple of meters, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what was shocking to me. Is it's like, why was that done?
Yeah.
The crowd was singing "Oh Canada" and whatever, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it was like, oh, we've got nothing better to do, let's go. But like from the police's side, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, the police were under immense pressure from.
yeah,
I'm gonna say the Champagne socialists, but I mean you could call them whatever you want to call them, like the laptop class, the the elites. I guess I don't like calling them the elites because I don't find them particularly.
What is Tim Pool? He came up with a term, city urban liberal types.
There we go. Yeah,
Now spell that out. Spell that out. Cult. Brilliant.
So that exactly. So they were under immense pressure because for 3 weeks, the truckers had the protests actually had just sat there. They just sat there. They were just occupying space, a little bit like the Occupy protests in the
Wall Street, right?
9-ish.
Yep.
Very peaceful, very friendly. I mean, they were the most Canadian thing you could ever see. They had hockey sticks with flags on.
I know.
They were just, just, like, jumping around, just having fun. And I'm not sure. Like again, I'm not in the inner workings, so I can't tell you why and exactly why or any of the sort of stuff. But the government seemed to want to use this instance as their own version of the January 6th that they can make into an insurrection story. And so they started calling people occupiers. They started calling them insurrectionists. They started saying they were trying to overthrow the government, all that sort of stuff. It's obviously nonsense. The truckers did put out a list of demands. They wanted mandates released, and they wanted another election called, essentially, to my knowledge. Which I would say are fair, requests considering the last 2 years. But anyways, yeah, so there was a lot of this pressure to get them out of there. And don't get me wrong, I do empathize with the people who were in the downtown area who heard honking, all day long. I can understand how annoying that would be. But in the end, what I find interesting is that all of this escalation. So it's very easy to get lost in the different things that happen along the way. But all of this escalation came from one thing. And that was these truckers who for the last 2 years have been going back and forth across the borders, no problem. have been shuffling food back and forth for everybody. All of a sudden, they put in a brand new mandate that they all had to be vaccinated. Something like 80% are vaccinated, maybe higher. So, like by the pro-vaccine crowd's own metrics, that's an acceptable rate. There's no reason to try to get more than that. But they decided that if you don't do this, you're done. You're not allowed to cross the border. You're not allowed to drive your truck. That's it.
Yeah.
So it was like all of this came from that thing, which for the trucker is a big deal. You're actually trying to ruin his life.
Yeah.
Like you're threatening his livelihood, his ability to put food on his table and live in a house. But for the government means nothing. Like it was a pointless action. It has no effect on the safety of the country. These guys sit in their rig, drive to one place, someone else takes everything out, drive back home. Like this is, they're not even on the list of dangers. If this were an extremely dangerous substance, they would be way down on the the risk.
It's practically a non-issue.
It's just a non-issue. So all of this came from that, but it became a boiler, like a gravitating point for everyone who was dissatisfied with this, and everyone kind of backed it. A lot of people I know went to Ottawa to join the protests on the weekends. They brought their kids. Everyone sat there. They just held signs and had a good time, and everyone was just really happy. It was a wonderful situation. It seemed from at least the people who were there. So in the end, I'm whether this was an excuse to usher in emergency powers, which seems to be the case. The government now has given itself powers to freeze any bank account without due process in the country for any reason they deem necessary, which is ridiculous. I don't know. I can't say what, but I have a feeling it was just politically expedient. Hey, I can now use this. I'm going to use this. Yeah. And then they just took whatever they wanted.
That does seem to be one of the caveats when it comes to most democratic countries. Is there's usually this sort of this clause that lets the government take ultimate power and do essentially whatever they want. And this was used in Switzerland, now in Canada, and in a bunch of other countries. And it essentially just takes all the democratic power from the citizens and just says, okay, no, the government can do whatever it wants now. In Switzerland's case, it wasn't completely like that, because we also did have 2 votes that confirmed that the majority of the citizens did want that sort of this COVID law to be put in place. The COVID law was put in place as this thing. But in Canada now, if you were to take a guess, do you think that if there was an actual per capita vote about this this enactment of the what is it called there? Emergency powers. Do you think that would actually get a majority vote?
If you had a referendum, you mean?
Yeah, if it was actually a referendum to ask.
If we had a referendum, I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think only the most devout cultists would agree. Because they're the ones who, it doesn't matter what is able to be seen with your eyes or heard with your ears. It's whatever the line is, right? But most people who are, kind of the in-betweeners can see that there's no reason for this. This is unnecessary. For one, they still haven't, so Parliament itself is supposed to vote on this act before it's actually allowed. Parliament hasn't voted on it yet.
Right. Yeah.
And they're already taking action. The government's already saying this is going to be permanent, and Parliament hasn't agreed yet. And the last poll I saw showed the Liberals, or Trudeau's party, down 8 points from what it was before in the polls. So it's not going well for him. If there was a vote right now, I don't think they'd put it through, or that it would go through. So in that way, I don't
unsurprising. Amanda would like to share something. So,
well, just on the point of this is one of the images that's been causing quite a stir. So this is the image of the second charge by the mounted police, And this this person here in the red coat, it's actually an elderly person. It's an old lady.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if you see right here beneath where her feet are, she has a walking aid on wheels.
Walker.
It's got
Mhm.
it's like they called it a walker,
Yeah.
some sort of walking aid. And there's a crutch there, a crutch or a cane.
Mhm.
And right after this happened, the media, I'm pretty sure because of what the police were saying, started
Yeah.
saying that a bicycle had been thrown at the
Yeah.
police.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was their kind of excuse for why the thing above happened, where you see this person lying completely under the butt of one of the
Yeah.
horses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was watching the press conference from the Ottawa chief of police, watching it live, and he was asked. I have to congratulate whoever that journalist was, but the journalist, a female journalist, actually asked him if he can corroborate or affirm. She said, well, apparently it wasn't a bicycle. Apparently it was someone's walking aid. And his reply was, there's an investigation ongoing. He cannot comment on it, which basically throws the thing out of the window.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, then it's not a bicycle.
Investigation. There's literal footage of it happening.
Exactly.
It takes
But-
him 2 minutes.
Right. The irony, the sickening irony, though, was just a minute before that, he was disparaging the protesters
Yeah.
for spreading misinformation.
Misinformation, the term, has become basically, I don't want to answer that, or I don't want to go there.
I don't agree with it.
All it is.
Yeah.
Like there,
Yeah.
it doesn't mean anything. It's like a lot of the buzzwords now. They just don't mean anything
Mm-hmm.
because they're so overused, and then they're not used in context at all.
Misinformation.
Yeah, and most of the misinformation. I mean, if you think media and you look at the Covington situation, you look at the Kyle Rittenhouse situation, you look at
Yeah.
the January 6th situation, you look at this. I mean, you could pick probably 1,000 more instances just over that same time period. Most misinformation comes from that source.
Yeah.
And that's the funny thing, because you have video evidence like this. There's video
Yeah.
evidence of what it was.
Mhm.
And yet most Canadian media, which by the way is state funded,
Mm.
is just ignoring that completely. So yeah, it's
In the last vote that we had a couple weeks ago, one of the templates was whether or not to subsidize the media here in
Increasingly.
Switzerland, to increase the subsidy.
Yeah.
The subsidy, and we voted against it, thankfully.
thank God.
So
Here's the thing, like, it needs to be an equal playing field for media. I think that's
Mhm.
how you fix the information problem.
Mhm.
Because right now, most, at least in Canada, most of the media we have extremely well funded, like to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars a year. These
Mhm.
people,
Mhm.
like we have hosts making millions of dollars a year, repeating lines on TV, which no podcast host or alternative news channel or anyone who wants to do anything is going to be able to match.
right.
Yeah.
But it's paid for by us through our taxes. However, it's not accountable to us in any way. So it's kind of, I'm very opposed to that. And I think that if you were to remove those subsidies, these organizations would have to either really get public opinion on their side by presenting actual factual information, or at least it would be a playing field in which competition could weed out the ones who are just full of, like,
Absolutely.
no one goes and finds some clickbait, or very few people, I should say, goes and finds a clickbait website and that's the news they follow, and that's the only news they follow. Most of the time that's the kind of website that doesn't go very far, because everyone's like, okay, yeah, this is just nonsense. But so the competition would work, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, here they have tabloid, what we would call tabloid news
Okay.
platforms, and they are pretty much the most popular. I mean, they have the widest reach. There's
Really?
there's two that have been around for a long time, but okay, so when I say tabloid, it's nothing like tabloid from the UK or
Okay.
yeah, like
Alien stole the queen, and
no. Swiss tabloid is very dull.
Okay.
It's not it's the most tabloid that we have, but it's
Right.
nothing like I don't know, what is the Daily Mail, for example. The Daily Mail, that's just like, whoa.
Kind of sensationalist.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me while I was watching all these live streams over the last, like, I watched the convoy traveling over Canada towards Ottawa. So I was watching what's her name, Tamara Leach, or
I think so. Yeah, that sounds right.
yeah. Doing live Facebook videos from her phone, sitting in the big red truck.
Nice.
And the momentum seemed incredible from the start. You know, it seemed like, wow. I mean, she was saying one morning they had left the parking. They were driving for half an hour at about between 30 and 50 kilometers per hour. And half an hour later, there were still trucks coming out of the parking. So that's
amazing.
A decent amount of vehicles. So, but the thing that struck me is that when they arrived in Ottawa, there was also quite a lot of steam. There was quite a lot of momentum. Of course, after sort of like 2.5 weeks, it kind of drizzled, like toned down a little bit, which is understandable. But then when the police started coming out and doing their thing, at the very beginning, when the police started coming out and sort of, I think they were more or less acting on the Emergencies Act, although even though it wasn't even voted in, right? Yeah. What struck me is that the number of people there was very small.
Yeah.
And there were like days before the crackdown.
One moment. Sorry.
Days before the crackdown, the press briefings by the convoy sort of organizers had been calling people, like saying to them, the thing we need most is you to come here. So they were calling people to come to the capital to join. And so the thing that struck me is that there weren't that many people who sort of came. Yeah. Like I would have thought something like this should really just pull the whole country by its heartstrings or something like that. But then again, I had been involved in dozens of demonstrations here in Switzerland over the course of 2021, and I witnessed demonstrations with like 100 people, and then some with 10,000, and the biggest one had between 50 and 80,000. It was too many to count. For Switzerland, that's a big deal. But the thing that struck me, even with the Canadian thing, like the demonstrations we had here, is it's not like the potential is massive, right? The amount of people that could be part of this thing is huge. Millions of people could be there. So again, I was asking myself, why is that? Why is it that not more people are coming? And on one hand, one can say, oh, well, it's because it's a discomfort thing to do. You know, it's going out of your comfort zone. You know, why bother? The other thing is, why bother? Because what is it going to affect, right? But then there's another thing that struck me as a possibility, and that is, again, coming back to the thing of information. And I asked myself this. I asked myself, if the media had been unbiased, had been reporting the facts as they were, not putting spin, not claiming these people were right-wing Nazis and whatever, there was so much BS that was being promulgated by the mainstream media. And I wondered if the information that the average Canadian person was receiving on their mobile phone, on their TV screen, and so on, was an accurate representation of reality, how different would the protests have looked?
You would have a resigned government right now.
Mm.
I think. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is the thing too. Strategically, information is everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not just, I mean, for survival, like you said earlier, right?
Mhm.
It's crucial for survival. But if you think of, and it's not often talked about, but if you think of any wartime environment, information and misinformation and psychological operations and these sorts they have a massive effect on the ability of any party to act in a way that they want, or to stay organized, or to stay unified, or any of these things that are crucial for large groups to do anything. So it really just comes back to what you were saying earlier. Control of information is important, and information should be free. It shouldn't be controlled, and it should
Absolutely.
definitely not be controlled by the same people who just so happen to control a lot of other powerful, entities and institutions.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are coming to this realization. I mean, the fact that we voted against subsidizing the media here anymore, I think that speaks volumes.
Yeah,
You
it
know?
shows at least a distrust in the mainstream media.
Yeah. I mean, we had been suspecting over the course of the year, over the course of like 12 months or so, we had been suspecting that there was, I mean, it was like more than a suspicion. There was media bias when it came to the COVID stuff.
Yeah.
But in late 2021, it wasn't too long ago, actually. It may have been early 2022. There was an online call that was being made between people in the media here in Switzerland. We have like 5 big media houses in Switzerland, and I think they're the second biggest. It's called Ringier Group. The CEO was on the call, and this call was supposed to be confidential, and someone leaked it out. And he said on the call, he actually said, and this is something that should stay within this call. And then he said, like, what an idiot. It's the internet, dude. He said that he had instructed all the editors of his media group, which they run Blick.ch, which is one of the 2 biggest tabloids here, and a whole bunch of other platforms as well. He instructed all his editors to back up the government's position on COVID to the hilt.
Yep.
And so this is like all these crackpot conspiracy theorists, whatever, who are like, yeah, the media is, not unbiased, or so and so on. And then you have something like this come out, you're like, dude.
Yeah. The level of interference in the super crucial points of, or I guess in the points of failure, whatever you want to call it, like the areas where if you tamper with this, it completely redirects things in a way that you want it to go. Across every institution in Canada, and it seems like in the entire world, or at least in the Western world, is incredible. So, for example, here, they made it illegal, or basically almost impossible through bureaucracy and supply shortages, to get early treatments for COVID. Made it so that there was really only one alternative. But it was a manufactured alternative. This is not a natural, they threatened the licenses of any doctors who either gave too many exemptions from the vaccine or who prescribed early treatments. So if you're prescribing early treatments, you almost had to do it underground. Like it had to be like a black market prescription. And these are treatments that are, and I'm not going to get into all of it, but there's so much out there about them. It's ridiculous to make these not available, and it's deadly to make these not available for some people. The amount of, I'm going to call it peer pressure because it's the best example I can give, or comparison I can give. The amount of peer pressure but also kind of like, when you work in a corporate environment, that very, it's subtle, but it's very real kind of pressure of do what we say or you're out.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
you'll never work in this field again, or whatever it might be. It's that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, but across every institution.
Mm-hmm.
So it's when you see that kind of coordinated action, on the one hand, you could say, okay, well, it's because this is the most obvious conclusion. Therefore, we're all just on our own coming to this conclusion. But then when you see the actual data and you start reading some of these papers and you start looking into it as you have, you're kind of like, well, no, but that can't be the obvious conclusion. So if that's not the obvious conclusion, what else do we have? And I think that's what people need to start getting to more and more, is just ask the questions. Does this person have another interest in mind? Is it possible that this is not, that they're not only looking out for my best interest? This doctor hasn't gone through however many years of medical school and part of these, like, just so that he can make sure that I have the best thing possible. And then start asking, okay, well, what's the context? Is there any other information I'm missing? Okay, and then just put the picture together and be like Sherlock Holmes, right? Like, once you've ruled out I can't remember the quote exactly, but once you've ruled out the impossible, the only solution that's left is the, or at least close to the truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of this is like what you were saying is, what is the context?
Yeah.
And so much of this is lies of omission.
Yes. Yeah.
That is, I mean, I pulled up something the last episode as an example. It was to do as well with COVID, and it was, and like, such a straightforward thing that if you just looked it up yourself for like 5 minutes, you would see, okay, yeah, what the media said here is true, but it's out of context. There's context that's missing, and I'm 99.99% sure that they know the context. I mean, either they know the context and they're ignoring it, or they are so bad at what they do that they should not be doing it.
That ends up being the comparison you always end up coming back to, because it's really the only two options. Either they're incredibly inept and not in their jobs, or they're playing some kind of game here, and that's really horrible. So,
and they still shouldn't be doing their jobs.
And they still shouldn't be in those jobs.
So we are almost out of time here, so I'd like to give you guys the opportunity, if you've got anything else you'd like to say, closing statements.
I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, just for me, when it came to the information, actually, no, I'll let Emmanuel start with this one.
No, this was your idea. Closing statements. That was, well, closing statements. I'm all out of breath. Like I was saying before, I think democracy is the best thing we've got to build on. I think at this point in time, I mean, it might change tomorrow, but at this point in time, I think that information is actually where the real problem is occurring.
Absolutely. And
all of these things that we talk about, whether it's globalism or injustice here or there or anywhere, a lot of I would imagine that probably all of these things would be more or less sorted out if everyone had information that was an accurate representation of reality.
Yeah.
So that's my closing statement.
I think what I would say is just kind of recap what we already covered here, in that we do have a very dangerous road that we're going down, and it's only going to get more dangerous because the technological ability to completely smother and crush any sort of freedom is only increasing. The connectedness of power, let's just say, I hate using that term because I know it's a super like radical lefty term, but it really is. It is such a thing as power and power centers, and the interconnectedness of that power it presents a problem.
Yeah,
I think that if I could say anything, we need to be looking for solutions and really driving hard at, like you said, finding reality, sticking with reality, not letting ourselves be distracted by details and little things that kind of um, can get thrown in to obfuscate, or, you know, being aware that there is probably information that's not being added. Look for the truth and just pursue where that goes to the best of our ability.
Absolutely. Like for me, absolutely, I find that information is absolutely core to that democracy works, and that we secure our freedoms and actually continue to have a say effectively. And speaking from my own personal experience during the pandemic, I initially was completely on the mainstream narrative, and I was very it was very difficult for me to accept anything that came from the other side, anything that didn't adhere to that. But over time, it was impossible for me to ignore the validity of the genuine points that came from open and accurate information. So that to me gives me a lot of hope that I believe the truth is more powerful than misinformation and lies, because the truth is what we all default to accepting, and lies and misinformation only work when someone covers up the truth and when someone specifically tries to hold it back.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I want to add to that I, like you, in the first 3 to 4 months in the year 2020, I was also completely in the mainstream groove. I was like, yep, let's do it. Let's get behind it. Let's support our country. Let's support the vulnerable, etc. Like, any measure that came through, I was behind it. And it's when certain cracks started to show that, you know, because the whole thing was supposedly based on science. And I always thought, well, science is something that is just, it's fact. It's like gravity. It's, you know, physics and shit, you know? And then suddenly there was this weird thing happening where they were saying it was science, but then it didn't pan out.
Yeah.
And it was, well, that can be another whole show. It's a very interesting road that I'm sure we've all gone through in this whole 2-year thing.
Yeah.
But the ability to get that information, and I can't imagine what the heck my life would have been like over the last 2 years if I had not been able to avail myself of that other information. And that's a scary thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have to build alternatives. We have to, I think that's really what we wanted to do here at Branch Out, was create a space where the average person, so I don't know if you call them blue collar worker or whatever, but where the average person on the street can come and just have a chat with us. That was the idea of this thing, because there's a lot of places online where people like amazing people like Jordan Peterson and you know, academics and scientists and people with credentials can come and have their say, and it's very interesting. I'm not downplaying that. But there's not a lot of places online where you have guests who are just like, hey, I met you at the supermarket, want to come have a chat? You know?
Yeah.
So this is what we're trying to do here. And if anyone out there knows of someone who'd like to come and have a chat with us, hook us up.
Absolutely. Well, yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us, Arthur.
Absolutely.
Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, great conversation.
Very fascinating. And yeah, I'm sure at some point we'll have you back on again to revisit some topics or talk about some new ones.
Sounds like lots of fun.
Absolutely. And to everyone who's watching or is watching on our platforms, thank you so much for supporting us and watching us. If you have any commentary on what we've talked about, if you liked it, disliked it, let us know. And yeah, until next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Arthur, have a blessed day. Have a wonderful day. I enjoy that sunshine.
Yeah.
All right.
Talk
See you,
soon.
man.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.